So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Nikki Ingham. I'm the Executive Director for the HPMA, the best job in the world because I get to work with you guys and to help make your lives hopefully easier. So today we've got a session with our colleagues at Liaison Workforce to talk about people analytics. Now, people analytics is a very hot topic. It's very in vogue, if you like, and people are actually talking about it quite a lot. So I thought it was very timely, and then to present the outcomes of the research that Liaison did with us. So just a few rules for the session as we start. So if you can keep yourself on mute all the way through, just so we haven't got any background noise, that's helpful, particularly for Carl as he speaks. So if you can put yourself on mute, if you can put your video on. I know people have issues with bandwidth, etc., but it's useful to see people's faces so we can see how you're responding to the session, and I get to put faces to names. I know names, but not what you look like. As I say, if you can change your name, just so we can again engage you and talk to you by your first name, and that's helpful as well. We will be having time towards the end of the session for questions and answers, so please use the chat function to put any comments as Carl's talking through anything, any questions that you might think of, and I will pose them to Carl towards the end of the session. So, as I say, in terms of setting the scene, so across the UK, we've had a number of strategies, so People Plan, Futures Review, the workforce strategy across Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland. And obviously in Scotland, they're reviewing the strategy there. But all of those strategies really point to the importance of really good and timely people analytics. It is a priority for us all. And what we want to do today is share with you some thoughts from the research, but also to use Carl and to engage in a conversation with about what the future may look like in terms of people analytics. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to a colleague, Caroline Durdle. I'm not sure if you're on yet, Caroline. Can't see you. If you are, wave at me. We're going to be joined hopefully by a colleague from Stockport. Stockport have been working with Liaison on workforce people analytics. So hopefully they can give oh, there she is. I can see your name now, Caroline. Can give some experiences from her as well. So you may want to pose some questions to Caroline as we go through. If you're a Twitter fan, you like tweeting, then if you can use the at Liaison Group. So at liaison_group and at HPMA, all in capital letters, _national. Then people can see what we're talking about today. So hopefully you can see the slides now that Carl's just put up. So if you go to the next slide, Carl, just in terms of outlining what we're going to cover today, if you can do that for me.
Sure. Yep, I'll just do that now.
Thanks. So we've got really 4 key objectives for this session. So one, obviously, to look at the outcome of the survey that was undertaken with our members. You may well have completed the survey yourself. To go through why analytics is important, the role of us as people professionals in terms of the world of people analytics, and then importantly for you to share your views, to challenge, to share experiences, and to start networking with like-minded people. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Carl, who's going to introduce himself first of all. So over to you, Carl.
Thanks, Nikki. Hello, everyone. I'm Carl. I've been working in the HR and payroll space for over 15 years. And whilst working for Liaison, this has been mostly with NHS organisations. And my most recent role in Liaison has taken me to People Analytics, where I work with NHS organisations to get prepared for and implement people analytics. And once it's implemented, we help organisations in the adoption of analytics, helping them move to a data-driven culture, which is a phrase you might hear a few times today. And as for Liaison, you may have heard of us. We work with hundreds of NHS organisations delivering our services to finance. Such as VAT recovery and forensics, or within our workforce transformation services such as
That's
the
where
management.
I'd hope to have a
Sorry,
conversation
Mark,
with the
sorry, Mark
since
Jenkins,
you're
could you put
saying
yourself on
versus
mute,
saying,
please? Mark, sorry, could you put yourself on mute? Can carry on, Carl, and hopefully I can't mute from here, so go on.
No worries. So that's me in a nutshell. I don't want to spend too long talking about myself.
Okay, thanks, Carl. A really good introduction to yourself and the work of Liaison. So it's important that we get into the content of the discussion today. So before we do that, just one thing to think about is that we all are going to be reliant on people analytics so that we have the right information at the right time. And one of my frustrations as a HR director was not having real-time data. It was historic data that we were tending to get, and also looking at various systems. So many organisations in the NHS rely on different business intelligence tools, Carl. So like ESR, Power BI, Tableau, to look at workforce data. So it'd be really useful to know sort of what your findings and thoughts are on the use of business intelligence versus people analytics. What's the difference? If you can share that with us.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. So we hear the phrase HR or people analytics all the time within HR, and people's thoughts and definitions can vary, but we tend to think of it like this. In particular, if we look at what people analytics is trying to achieve. So according to the CIPD, it's the use of people data and analytical processes to solve business problems. So providing HR professionals and stakeholders with workforce insights and bring in or help to improve evidence-based decision making. So making sense of large sets of workforce data and data sources, cutting through the noise to get to the most relevant and impactful insights, to monitor performance and help make strategic plans for the future to improve, and hopefully do this in the most automated way possible. But this area is in a very innovative space right now. Its capabilities and expectations change quickly. And so we will talk about some of the current foundational aspects in this session, but we'll also cover where analytics is heading in the future. However, when looking at some of the foundational aspects, it's a good place to start is looking at the differing technical approaches to implementing people analytics. Most that we know and see are the first three listed here. We have Excel spreadsheets, DIY business intelligence tools like Tableau and Power BI, and enterprise class BI platforms like those that sit on top of ESR. And these are usually quite generic. I'm sure I don't need to spell out the pitfalls of using Microsoft Excel. It has its uses and it has its strengths. It's easy to use, but it's simply not designed for large and complex data sets and can be difficult for users to interpret or for people to collaborate with. In the case of business intelligence solutions, they have their place and they're extremely powerful and functionally rich, but they are rarely specific to HR or workforce needs. In fact, the driver for implementation is usually finance, and that is where the focus quite often usually stays. From a recent Freedom of Information request that we got sight of that focused on the use of BI solutions, we know this to be true. As it stated, finance were the dominant users of these solutions, with operational and clinical teams in second and third place. Everyone wants a slice of the pie, and usually finance are the ones stood in the kitchen as it comes out the oven, with HR stood outside the house knocking on the front door. So, from Liaison's own survey of HPMA members, which we'll cover in more detail shortly, this was also further backed up from the responses that we received, where the respondents stated that just 6% of organisations said that HR were utilising the BI solutions available to them. So a clear barrier exists. It's clear that HR teams need something that is specific to them and their needs. What is commonly referred to in the industry as a pure play model. So HR teams don't have to compete with the rest of the organization. They've got something that's agile, easily configurable by HR professionals for HR professionals, and requires little technical expertise. So with BI solutions, you usually get single points of failure, resource bottlenecks, but we can also then look to make the most impactful data available to the users, and that can make the most impact on workforce performance. Something we at Liaison try to place a lot of focus on. It's become an integral part of our analytics adoption approach. So today we wanted to focus on the results of the survey I just mentioned, that Liaison Group and HPMA sent out to the members in November last year about how people analytics is a priority of NHS workforce management. And hopefully in this session interest you enough to look at a report that we did on the results and how these tie back to a recent report published by the Chief People Officer, Pirana Isar, called NHS Human Resources and Organisational Development, which was also published in November. So following this session, HPMA will send out feedback requests, and here you can request to be sent a copy of the report, or alternatively, not long after that, we'll make it available to download as well. So yeah, so that's just a little summary of the different approaches and what we've got coming up, Nikki.
Thanks, Carl. It's great to see on one slide the various means and methods, but you don't have back of a fag packet on there because sometimes it feels that that's the investment we get in people systems. Anyway, let's turn to the report now and the feedback you've had from our members. So what are the key findings that came out of that research?
So I guess the first finding, so what today's not about is just me talking about the report. There's quite a lot of information in the report, so we've summarised what we think the key findings are. And the first one is that nearly all the respondents stated that people analytics was a priority, with over 3/4 stating it was a high priority. What we found interesting is that 1 in 8 organisations haven't even made a start using people analytics yet, despite it being part of the NHS People Plan, and it has been for a while. We also found that less than half the organisations surveyed had appointed an executive sponsor for people analytics. For this, and indeed any project to work and progress, organisations need to be serious about the commitment that this will take, and not just make it a tick box exercise or a line on an improvement plan to say it's in progress. You genuinely do need a top to bottom approach, otherwise it will fall by the wayside. Organisations need to be proactive in taking analytics forward from top to bottom, especially as it affects so many stakeholders. And ultimately, you are looking to impact the organisation's culture in the end. So that needs serious buy-in from all levels, as well as a lot of effort, time, cost, and first impressions will be wasted. And those first impressions you never get twice. So, you know, there's an opportunity for you all to support each other through the HPMA and the challenges that you're going to experience across systems. The second finding we wanted to highlight is that skills and knowledge is a major barrier to adoption. 2/3, in fact, of respondents stated that skills and knowledge is a barrier within the HR function. Coupled with less than 1/3 of managers have the right skills to become data and digital and data savvy. We found this really interesting as it speaks to the challenges we see with the technical solutions in use. So if we think back to the business intelligence solutions and the Excel spreadsheets, you know, they usually require 1 or 2 very skilled employees to create, build and maintain visualizations and reports. Often a lot is lost in translation in creating these between HR and the technical teams. You don't always have that business analyst to help you do that. And as a result, you often get a lot of information overload, which is as bad as not getting enough information. And you get this from reports created for specific scenarios, caveats, and situations. So in short, HR and managers need to cut through all that noise and systems the data is held in to the most impactful information quickly in a way that's easy to use and interpret. And this will increase the confidence among these users and will make them more data savvy and self-sustaining when it comes to workforce data. We're seeing organizations introducing new data roles into HR. 3 in 4 organizations, in fact, are introducing data analytical roles, but only 1 in 4 are creating data leader roles. And if we think about some of the lack of executive sponsorship that we talked about earlier, this further reinforces the challenge that HR functions have to change the relationship with workforce data and the organization's culture to data without that right top to bottom down support. And the third finding, which may not be a surprise to a lot of you, is 2/3 of respondents stated that data quality was a challenge, and 1/3 said it was a barrier to people analytics adoption. So organizations need a clear plan for tackling data quality. Many organizations have been probably paralyzed by the scope of the task in the past, but the longer it's left, the bigger that task becomes. There are, we think, 3 things any organizations can consider when tackling data quality for people analytics. The first one of those is considering a staggered rollout. Not all workforce data needs to go live on day 1. Get some quick wins under your belt. Create a plan for the rest. This is certainly an approach that we take with our clients, taking bite-sized chunks. Second, create accountability or ownership over the data. The common misconception that I'm sure that quite a lot of you probably feel is that HR do not own workforce data or the reporting teams. They merely process the data. The managers own the data, and until accountability is established, communicated, even if you fix all the historical issues, the same problems will arise again. Organizations may need to adapt processes, but also have an ongoing process of data review and correction. It is, and I'm afraid it always will be, a continuous task to tackle data quality. It will always be there. So we need to let managers know that they and their teams will be monitored, challenged, supported, and managed on the data as is. It's their responsibility. And I know that's a challenge. If we again think about the lack of top-down support, alignment, and buy-in, establishing and communicating accountability becomes harder. So again, it reinforces that point, how important that top-level down approach is. Once we've established how to fix the data quality going forward, and we have established accountability, we can then think about how we want to correct any historical issues. And this is the third sort of approach that organizations can take that we've been suggesting to organizations. And an effective way of doing this might be a data amnesty, a kind of grace period to acknowledge the data is wrong and what data we need to fix, and articulate the importance, and also an opportunity for managers to correct it with no blame approach, offering support and guidance. Perhaps a 6-month period of gradual corrections, supported with updated processes, and letting them know what their progress is, what progress they're making in data correction as well. So I guess those are sort of the top 3 findings that we found from the report, Nikki.
Great, thanks. Remember to put myself off mute. So it's really interesting in terms of if I draw out the issues around accountability and the accountability for workforce data, where does it sit? That's a really big, it's refreshing to hear that it is the manager's data, it sits with them. Because I think very often everyone blames the data, it's wrong, it's not accurate. So, then the HR team gets the job of making it better for people. So one of the challenges that we can find with the introduction of any new HR solution is getting the HR workforce people team on board. That's one of the challenges. But also then managing implementation, the adoption of the new system, engagement of the new system, and getting people to be clear what their responsibilities are with the new system. And that, in terms of getting people on board, engaging, can make or break a solution. So it'd be useful, Carl, if you could share what you think the key areas that organisations should focus on to make it a success when looking at a new system or a new solution.
Yeah, absolutely right. That all that sort of rings true with some of the experience that we've had working with organisations. There are steps that need to be taken, I think, to help prepare an organisation to use people analytics. We need to understand, first off, where we are on our journey with data. What's our current level of data maturity, if you like? And I guess we think we can understand this by looking at 3 questions the organisation should be asking themselves. Maybe starting with, what is our organisation's HR strategy regarding people data? Maybe, when considering data collection, the content presented to the users needs to be relevant. Information overload, or users not understanding what is presented to them is often a factor that disengages users early on. And so HR leaders need to be clear on what areas of analysis have the most value and impact, so that users can find meaning and value in the data quickly. This will also create a sense of priority to the data you wish to focus on as part of the implementation, taking those bite-sized chunks, get to those quick wins and target the most impactful areas. Thinking about these things is really important. You wouldn't, for example, you won't build a house without having a blueprint. You really need to have a foundational strategy. And then I think, the second one we consider is, do we understand the value and purpose of people analytics? So we know we need to do it. We've been told by lots of different people, and it's the future. But to bring people along on the journey and ultimately change an organization's relationship with data and moving to that data-driven culture I mentioned earlier, you need to be able to articulate what value it will bring to the organization and how it will benefit the different stakeholders. Understand what the non-monetary benefits are and what it hopes to achieve from the analytics. For example, it's not about replicating every report you have now and giving users access to hundreds of reports and try and make analytics fit operational processes. If we think back to the workforce strategy, it's more about monitoring performance, trends, helping organizations model workforce strategy for the future with the most impactful analysis for the type of person that's viewing that data as well. It's getting the value to the user as soon as possible. And then we probably need to ask ourselves, what are the data quality challenges? Do we understand them? So we already know this is the barrier, backed up by the survey, and there's lots of anecdotal experiences that often colleagues at Liaison have had. But the graveyard for reporting software products is vast and well walked. We see it all the time, and it's not unique to the NHS. It's often because they're rolled out to the user base and the users don't then, or never have, trusted the data or know how to effectively utilize it. It is rare to get 2 chances to engage a user base, so it is extremely important to ensure that the data presented is of a high quality from the outset. Bad data leads to bad analysis and a bad user experience. So we need to think about data quality in all its forms. So, is the data correct is mainly what people think about with data quality, but, is the data even recorded? Is it missing? Do we need to change processes to start capturing data ASAP? For example, there's a large focus on health and well-being and monitoring that. Do we even record at the moment when a health and well-being conversation takes place? How do we do that? Is it data we can use? Is the data structured enough to understand? So if we think about something like payroll elements, you might have 15 or 20 pay elements that goes through payroll to pay overtime in different areas. If you just put that into a chart, that'd be a nightmare to view. It'd give you a headache from all the colors. So how do we categorize that data? Is the data received quick enough? What's the velocity of the data? Is it too out of date by the time it gets to you? And I know you mentioned that earlier, Nikki, as a frustration. Will it disengage the audience if they see it's out of date? Is the data granular enough? Do we have the capability to understand a metric or report in more detail, make meaningful relationships to the data sources? And in some cases, is the data even accessible? Can we even access data to analyze it? You know, is the data just, we've got a set number of reports, but we can't access the raw data? And then similarly, you know, does the data even have value? You know, why would we spend effort and resources processing data that's not going to solve business problems? I think that's also worth thinking about, letting that driftwood float away. And then if we think about breaking down silos of data, you know, can the data be linked? If we think about, I'm going to use ESR as an example with assignment number, you know, if we triangulate to other data sources such as rostering or recruitment systems, we will probably need to ensure assignment number, for example, is present in those systems. So for us, it's clear that data quality cannot be underestimated and cannot be addressed on the fly. It just, you know, we've seen organizations try to fix it as they implement analytic solutions, but to do that, you need a clear and detailed plan. It deserves its own focus and attention and commitment, and it will be more straightforward for some organizations than others, but in all cases, it needs to be addressed sort of one way or another. And as the data maturity, you know, evolves and organizations progress, the questions, you know, the three questions, I guess, that I've talked about here, for your question there, Nikki, you know, the questions that organizations need to ask themselves as they evolve will change, but this is reflective of where most NHS organizations are now and how we will get started with people analytics. Considering these sort of questions and how they will be actioned, I think is shown to lead to a smoother transition to using people analytics long term and the benefits it gives the stakeholders involved. Hopefully that answers your question, Nikki.
It does, very comprehensive. Wow. So we're starting to see a bit more some questions and comments in the chat, which is really helpful. So I encourage people to continue to do that. So I suppose moving on and building on what we've learned through the survey, I suppose it's various organisations have very different strategies, and they'll have a different perspective on what they want from people analytics. So it'd be really interesting to hear sort of your thoughts on what you feel is driving the strategy and a more vigorous focus on people analytics.
Yeah, sure. Well, from half of the survey responses listed in the report, there are two main aims of organisations that we're seeing. Nearly half stated that the main aim is to create a data-driven culture. And then I think over a third stated it was to improve organisational agility. And if we can do this, it will drive some of those specific drivers listed in the report, such as diversity, inclusion, and retention. They were listed as the top two drivers, followed by workforce availability, recruitment, turnover, and people costs. What we found interesting and what we're seeing a change in is that in the top six drivers, yeah, most are made up of the core HR measures like turnover and retention. And these have been on the HR agenda for a long time now. But now we can see things from initiatives such as the NHS People Plan starting to influence what's being focused on. With diversity and inclusion, I think actually being right at the top of the drivers. And we are starting to see other non-traditional drivers coming up as well, such as ethics, well-being, leadership and culture. They're starting to get the focus more and more. And looking back at the CPO's report, Chief People Officer's report, it's clear that if enough of us achieve these aims of moving to a data-driven culture and improving organizational agility, this has a massive amount of potential to improve system level collaboration for workforce planning, resources matched up with demand, interoperability, and general better system level working. So collaboratively, making the most of our resources across the system, it is a lot harder without the data.
Thanks, Carl. So moving on in terms of the discussion, I suppose it's thinking through from a return on investment perspective, which a lot of organisations will request. What are some of the benefits that organisations can see or are seeing or can expect to see going forward?
Sure, yeah. From the survey responses, the top 3 identifiable benefits were 3/5 stated that being a stronger HR business partner was the biggest benefit. Over half said that measuring interventions would be a benefit. And then finally, half also said improving the employee experience would be important, which links to the drivers we just discussed, particularly with diversity, inclusion, ethics, and health and well-being. And Stockport NHS Foundation Trust have actually started to realise some of these benefits. We've been working, we have a case study talking about this on our website, which you're free to go on and have a look at. But what I've done is I've invited Stockport's Head of Strategic Workforce Development along today, Caroline Durdle. I've just given a 30-second warning to unmute. So you can hear about some of these benefits directly from her. Caroline was and continues to be a pioneer of people analytics within Stockport NHS Foundation Trust, driving forward its implementation last year and its adoption and rollout to over 300 users now. And now we've moved into a fine-tuning stage for its use and getting the most out of the benefits. So Caroline, if you're ready, I'm going to invite you and bring you in now.
Caroline, before you, I just want to say a huge thank you for coming here and being here to share your learning with everyone else, but also I have to say this because Caroline is an award winner for one of our HPMA awards in the Northwest. And we've just launched them, the National Awards, so please have a look at them. But thank you. Over to you, Caroline.
Thank you. So it's nice to be here. I think from the point of view of with Carl and talking about the benefits for the organisation, we've been putting this in process now probably 18 months, but the last 12 months we've really pushed, and I've been the lead for it, which we didn't previously have. And I think we've seen the benefit of that from an organisational point of view and people adopting the system. I think one of the big key factors with people analytics for us is it's very reactive from a point of view of if there are any glitches, or if I say, and Carl rolls his eyes at me very often, if I say, can we just have this? Yeah, he's shaking his head now. Can we just have that? Can we just have, so that we can still tweak the system, we can still get what we need out of it. So one of the bits that was added, so when we started, we basically provided our workforce normal reports, so pages and pages of Excel, and that was then created into the people analytics system. But from there, we've added other bits that become helpful for managers and for the HR team. For example, we now have information on the system that allows forward planning for appraisals and training, so you can see who's coming up. It's not just about why have you only hit the 80%, why have you not hit the 95? It's saying actually, in order to get there, this is how you can forward plan. So we've got that forward planning. It is a really simple system to use, and it's everything's there for you month on month, so that you're not having to sort of remember how you made that graph last month or where you got the detail from. So a lot of that sort of have a pick the right Excel sheet. And I think from a HR operational point of view, as as we alluded to, as Carl alluded to earlier, we're not necessarily all technical people and don't know how to use Excel to its advantage or not. So the system enables us to do that. The other bit is going back to the comment about managers taking responsibility for the facts and the figures, and also the comment about the data's not right. That sort of chatter has lessened within this organisation, touch wood, because managers can now see their data. So if they're thinking that 80% appraisals isn't the right figure for my patch, and instead of them just saying that's not right, the data's not right, now they actually have access to go in and see where that 80% comes from. And a lot of the time, they don't come back to us again to say, oh, yeah, I realise why those people. So from that point of view, it's enhancing what the managers can see and sort of their interaction with the data. I think the other big thing is, and I tell this to everyone when I'm sort of introducing them to it, is you can't break the system. I've been trying for 18 months and I've not managed it yet, but I think that's something that's reassuring to people that aren't data whiz kids. So that's sort of that benefit for us as an organisation, that it is there and it is absolutely user friendly. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything else that you want me to sort of cover specifically, Carl. But...
No, that's fantastic, Caroline. And I think those things are true of any pure play solution. It's having a system that's focused for the users that are going to use it to make it simple, I think. And I think you're right, Caroline. I think that's where we've won hearts and minds over, isn't it, in its simplicity. Okay, thanks very much, Caroline, for coming on to give some real perspective over that. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, huge thank you, Caroline. Really, really helpful. I'm sure there may be some questions that we've now got getting in the chat that will be helpful to get your perspective on as well. So moving forward then, Carl, where is people analytics going? What's the future look like for the NHS?
So that's a great question, you know, where it's going next. I think one of the areas that we're seeing a lot of progress in is bringing in some of those additional data sets that's high on the NHS agenda, that we've mentioned a little bit already. You know, those data sets that are not traditional. So combining the quantitative traditional data with the qualitative data. So if we think of health and well-being, which you mentioned already, you know, how many health and well-being conversations are we having? What is the sentiment of those conversations and actions? How do we measure progress? Appraisals, you know, as well as compliance. What's the context of the appraisal conversations? Can we compare this with the health and well-being data, for example? The opportunity of survey data, particularly around pulse surveys. How do we link this in with workforce data seamlessly? And a good and fairly sort of simple example that I read about recently involved a company that utilized their data from a health and safety assessment. A standard survey they sent out quite regularly to all employees. They compared the responses with their workforce data, particularly the absence data, and quickly found that they had high levels of back pain, shoulder pain, basically musculoskeletal related absence for their office workers. And they quickly calculated the cost of this absence. They compared this to the cost of buying everybody in their offices special ergonomic chairs for all office employees, a quite expensive outlay on first look. But the reality was, you know, within just a few moments, it was, they already knew the cost of the absence, and it was a drop in the ocean compared to the days lost in musculoskeletal related absence. And in doing this, the musculoskeletal absence significantly dropped. The staff were healthier, happier, and less absent. You know, and as we start to look at these data sources more and more of the more non-traditional variety, we will need ways, I guess, of churning all these numbers and insights. You know, there's already a challenge churning all the data that we already have with the traditional HR subjects. So we'll be looking at more massive amounts of data quickly. And this is where machine learning and AI is going, artificial intelligence. They're going to play a massive part in the near future. We spoke to a senior leader that has worked with nurses for years in the NHS, and she said that one of the most powerful insights that she could have is why two nursing teams with the same amount of beds, capacity, FTEs, experience, and demographic have two completely different set of patient outcomes. She wanted to know what could make those teams perform differently. What are the nuances? With all the data that we've got, the quantitative and qualitative, can we use AI to look at those data sets and look at things like, is the training up to date? How often does it expire? What's the lead time? Are the appraisals up to date? What are the content of those appraisal conversations? What is the management capability within the teams? How many, again, health and wellbeing conversations, how many of those are we having? How happy are the staff, going back to the pulse surveys? So using artificial intelligence across all these questions and data sets, that's the next big thing in people analytics. And I think it's fair to say it's still in its infancy within the industry a little bit, but like I said earlier, it's a people analytics evolves quickly. The market does, and it won't be long before artificial intelligence is the norm. But not to make decisions, but to support teams, to back up and support professional judgment, I think. And it's combining artificial intelligence with human intelligence, really. However, this is the future. And before we get there, we need to make sure we tackle some of those foundational challenges on our journey with data. And going back to some of the earlier questions, one of these foundational challenges is of course making that data right. Focus on this early on as possible. Otherwise, this bright and exciting future of making HR decisions with a robot sat next to you is just not possible, I'm afraid. So I think that concludes the questions and the time that we've got. But before I pass back over to Nikki and open the floor to any questions from attendees, I just wanted to remind you that following the feedback request from HPMA after this session, you can request to receive a copy of the report I mentioned earlier, which contains all of the findings that I've talked about today and some of the answers I've expanded on, plus a lot more. And some of those are the detailed stats as well behind the findings. So Nikki, I'll hand back over to you.
Thanks, Carl. That's been really, really informative. And what's really interesting is that the time is now for us as a profession to really lift the data off the sheet and actually tell a story with it, rather than producing reports that tend to be ad hoc in terms of a manager wants to know this, somebody else wants to know that. How can we have consistent reporting that actually tells the story that's helpful? And that's not in isolation to other performance. So you talked about patient outcomes there in that little example, etc. We need to make sure that we're correlating and looking and aligning the data, supporting managers to really understand what their story is, as opposed to us telling them what their story is. So thank you for that. So we've got some comments and some questions in the chat, so I'll just go through them in order that they've appeared, if that's okay. So Joe Wright makes a comment around the challenge of the speed of data is that sometimes offsetting time needed to close the data off, collection in terms of data collection, and then validate it and ensuring quality is a challenge. So have you got any thoughts about how you get around that in terms of cut-off points, people getting the information into the system before it's then shut down for that month? Have you got any sort of reflections on that, Carl?
I suppose it's what we've seen with organisations tackling those sorts of challenges. That's a great question, by the way, and we hear that a lot. Is not trying to tackle it. So if you think about when the reporting teams get the data and when payroll gets the data and when HR see the data, that's almost the last link in the chain. And trying to solve it there solves it that month, but not the future months. So it's thinking about how we can solve those challenges early on as possible in the chain, and whether that's ESR self-service, whether that's policies or processes, or establishing some of those things that I mentioned earlier around ownership over the data. And I know that's really hard for us as people professionals to change, and that's why you really do need that top-down level support for people analytics, because a huge subset of that is the data quality and the velocity of data. So you will need that buy-in, and it's obviously, as people professionals, we don't control that, but hopefully we can influence it, and we can influence senior management to help us get the buy-in we need to change processes, to invest a little bit in a project to help data quality and the velocity of data, and establish ownership over that data as well.
Okay, thanks, Carl. I'm going to do what I said I wouldn't do. I'm going to go to just the question at the end, which is about integration with other systems of your system, with particularly ESR. I think that's a really important question that many people will be thinking about. So, Carl.
Yeah, so sorry, what was this? I'm just going to open up. How is integration with the system? Oh, okay, yeah. So, you know, it's part of the data. It's part of the data piece to think how things are going to integrate. You know, fundamentally, the quality of the data needs to be there to do that. And if we think about, you know, our journey with analytics, those are the things we need to think about as early on as possible. And then we can start to think about the tools and how we do it, because even with Excel, we can integrate data sets with other data sets. Okay, it might take ages, and it might require some guy who's been working with Excel for 20 years, locked in a dark room for 2 weeks, but you can do it, you know, using Excel. It's all about the data and the processes that go into the input of data, and the accountability that you place on the people inputting that data as well. Then the integration, once you've got the data there, the processes, the accountability established, and the data quality established, you know, it just becomes a choice then of what system you use to integrate that data together. And you can do that using BI solutions fairly easily if you've got the right skill set to use them. And with people analytics, you know, we use as I mentioned earlier, the ESR assignment number just to link everything together. And if that doesn't exist, and we do a more summarized piece of triangulation, it's at a cost center level. So it's making sure you got that strong hierarchy, I guess, across the whole organization and all its systems.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that question, Eva. So going back to Sarah D. So this relates to the accountability question, which we've been talking about quite a lot this afternoon, but particularly around medical staff. So people being accountable for medical staff, you tend to find a lot of managers don't accept that they have responsibility or accountability. So what Sarah's saying is no one knows who inputs sickness, special leave, but they do have process around booking annual leave and study leave. So if managers say, I don't manage medics, this is a huge expensive resource that doesn't help with other areas such as COVID recovery, job planning. So have you got any thoughts about how you support, and maybe Caroline might have a view here as well about how you support managers to accept their accountability for information, its input, its output, and its narrative?
Yeah, it's a great question again. You know, I think this is why it's multifaceted, yeah, in terms of our approach with analytics. There's a few foundational things you need to do. There's not one answer for accountability. You know, we need that executive buy-in. If we think about, you know, the data leaders that we have in organizations, and only 1 in 4 of the respondents stated they've got a data leader, you know, that in essence is saying, well, we're lacking leadership around data in the organization, you know, or you know, we're passing that leadership on to somebody else. So we need to think about how that leadership is driven through the organization. You know, accountability won't really get off the ground until we do that. And I talk about, you know, making a serious commitment to data quality. And I think, you know, changing accountability will require a lot of effort and a lot of resource do that. And that might be changing processes, updating policies, setting expectations, and and then maybe even investing on the systems to input things. So inputting absence. Some organizations use ESR self-service, some use none. I've seen one organization who used carbon copy sheets of paper to record sickness, and somebody rekeys it on a spreadsheet, and then somebody rekeys that onto ESR. So it's, and that's because they didn't have the headspace. I guess they were paralyzed by the task, really. They didn't have the resource or headspace to do it because they didn't have any spare time, and they were short-staffed, and they didn't have any investment commitments. And those things are impossible to change, right, without executive buy-in, without senior management support. So I haven't got an easy answer for you, I'm afraid, Sarah. I would love to, because we could that'd be a really great answer to have, but I'm afraid it's a combination of things, and I think it starts with executive support.
Yeah, I don't know if you're still there, Caroline, whether you've got any sort of thoughts as how you approached it at Stockport in terms of getting that manager buy-in, particularly with medical workforce.
I think it goes back to what processes and roles and responsibility definitions we've got in the first place, rather than relying on the data, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I have to hand on heart say that we probably haven't cracked that nut totally here, from the medical workforce engaging with people analytics. But to me, it is going back to that processes in the first place that give very clear definitions of what and whose responsibilities are what, so that you can make sure things are then put in to the computerized side of things, so that the data comes out right at the end.
Okay, that's helpful and very honest, Caroline. Thank
you.
I
think, sorry, I'd just to add to that, Nikki, I think Caroline raises a great point there. It goes back to, we don't need to tackle not everything needs to be perfect straight away, not for every metric, not for every system. And that's the same for users as well. If you can get 6 out of your 7 divisions using analytics, bragging about how great it is, and you've changed the culture and relationship with data for 6 out of the 7 divisions in the organization, medical are not going to be that 7th division who's lagging behind for long. They'll want to see those benefits as well. So you'll start to create the appetite for change because you've already started to change the culture of the organization. I think that's always an important thing to keep in mind. Not everything has to be perfect.
Yeah, nobody wants to be left out, do they? Okay, great. Thanks, Carl. So a question from Amanda, or a comment from Amanda Price. One area that's difficult to track, which would be really, really helpful, is around career progression and the differences across the protected characteristics. So again, does people analytics, is it able to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it just comes down, so we can monitor those protected characteristics easily, easier than I can say the word easily, in ESR and the other payroll systems that are used, through the diversity fields and equality fields and those sorts of things. So it then just becomes a case of, well, how do we measure career progression? Is it using the assignment details to measure how long it is since they've last had a promotion? Is it monitoring the training they're having and triangulating the training with some of those contractual details as well? Are there any other third-party systems that we're using to track that? And can we get the data out of those systems? And can we link that data to the assignment data? So in the example I used earlier, have we got assignment number in that system where we measure other career progression updates? So one of the things we're easily able to do, just using the data that's in the ESR system at the moment, is look at how much of the senior leadership team is made up of male and female, and compare that to the rest of the organisation, you know, band 7 and below. And we could do the same across ethnicity as well, and disability, and all that stuff is really easy to bring together sort of straight away and gives you that view in an instant. And then it just becomes a case of complementing that with other data sets, really.
Great, that's really helpful. Thanks for the question, Amanda, the comment, and thanks, Carl, for the response. So there's a few people having to dial off now because we're near to completion. So there is one question from Alan Slack about screenshots of how the system looks. So I don't know if there's anything available on your website where people can actually go and see what a report might look like using the systems that you've talked about.
Yeah, there's some Alan, there's some visualizations on the website. There's a couple of videos as well, a few little screenshots here and there. But if you're happy to share your details in the feedback survey, we can, you know, we'll happily get in touch and send you a bit more information as well following this session.
Great, thanks, Carl. Okay, so we're bringing this to a close because I'm conscious that you'll be straight into another Zoom or Teams meeting. So thank you to Carl, and a huge thank you to Caroline for taking the time to join us this afternoon. As Carl said, we will be sending out an evaluation questionnaire where you can request a copy of the report, but it will be available on Liaison's website and also on the HPMA Hub next week, the week after. So keep a lookout for that. So thanks for staying with us and enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully see you again soon. Bye for now. Bye.